Rain slammed against the canopy, lightning flashing so close it lit the cockpit like a camera flash. The fuel light screamed red. 8 minutes, maybe less. Out of the clouds, four F-22 Raptors slid into formation around her like wolves boxing in prey. "Alter course, Navy girl," the lead pilot's voice crackled, smug and sharp. "This is our airspace." Sarah Chen's grip tightened on the stick. She'd been airborne for 4 hours, running low on fuel, and every second they toyed with her pushed her closer to ditching over open water. They thought this was a game. They didn't know why she was still flying, what she had promised herself she would never allow to happen again. The storm swirled around them, a cathedral of thunder and fire, as the Raptors moved in tighter. Close enough she could see the lead pilot grinning. Close enough that one wrong twitch would send them all into the sea. Her finger hovered over the radio switch. One call sign, 2 words. That was all it would take. Words the Air Force didn't yet realize would change everything. When she spoke, the air itself seemed to pause. "This is Ghost." Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen's gloved fingers clenched the control stick of her FA-18 Super Hornet as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. The fighter sliced through massive, swelling cumulus clouds at 28,000 feet, each bank and tilt making the metal frame groan in the turbulent air. Below her, the Pacific Ocean stretched without end, an endless sheet of steel-gray glass reflecting the roiling storm system above. What had been meant to be a simple, almost boring routine patrol had turned into a test of nerves and endurance, her muscles aching from hours of tension. The amber glow of her fuel gauge glared back at her like a warning she couldn't ignore. She had barely enough fuel to limp back to the USS Nimitz. Through rare breaks in the thick cloud cover, the carrier was just a tiny speck in the distance, almost lost in the storm's haze. "Hornet 201, this is Tower. You're cleared for straight-in approach, runway 1. Weather's deteriorating fast, winds gusting to 40 knots across the deck." The air traffic controller's voice came through her headset in bursts, half swallowed by the crackle and hiss of static from the electrical storm. "Copy, Tower. Hornet 201 inbound. Fuel state critical." Her own voice was calm, clipped, but she could feel the tension gathering at the base of her neck. Banking left, she adjusted her approach vector, keeping her movements precise as lightning flashed in jagged white forks through the cloud banks. The sky looked alive, dangerous. She'd been airborne nearly 4 hours. The mission had gone long after her radar picked up several suspicious blips, contacts she'd pursued deep into contested waters, only to find they were nothing more than a pod of migrating whales. Still, in waters like these, it was better to overreact than regret later. For the past hour, her radar warning receiver had been completely silent. Too silent. In her 8 years as a naval aviator, Sarah had learned one thing above all. When the world got that quiet, it wasn't peace. It was the pause before the storm. And right now, every nerve in her body was screaming danger. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled. The sensation was sharp and undeniable. The same gut-deep warning she'd felt over the Taiwan Strait 2 years earlier. Moments before her threat warning system lit up with a bone-rattling wail that had nearly frozen her blood. "Multiple contacts closing fast from 6 o'clock high," she called, snapping her head around to scan the mirror-like surface of her canopy. Gray clouds, raindrops clinging to glass, nothing else. "Contact bearing 180 Angels 3-2, multiple bogeys inbound, hot." Her voice stayed steady, even as her heart rate spiked. Years of training had drilled that composure into her bones. She began evasive maneuvers, but with her dwindling fuel, her options were already shrinking. Then they appeared. 4 F-22 Raptors tore out of the clouds like predators emerging from fog. Their angular stealth silhouettes looked almost alien, slicing through the air with a grace that was both beautiful and menacing. They moved as one, precise, fluid, sliding into a perfect box formation around her Hornet. Every shift in their positions was so coordinated it felt like watching a choreographed dance. Sarah's breath caught. These weren't ordinary pilots. You didn't fly in formation that tight without thousands of hours and the kind of focus that left no room for fear. The lead Raptor eased in on her port side, so close she could see the faint reflection of his helmet visor through the canopy. Too close. At this speed and altitude, a single twitch could turn both aircraft into flaming wreckage. Unknown Navy aircraft, you are interfering with Air Force training operations. Alter course to heading 090 immediately and clear the area. The voice in her headset was young, cocky, seasoned with the kind of arrogance that didn't survive long in real combat. Sarah's jaw tightened. She flicked her gaze to the fuel gauge. The amber had turned red. Maybe 10 minutes of flight time left. Less if she had to maneuver hard. Negative Raptor lead. I'm on final approach to the Nimitz. Fuel state emergency. You need to clear my airspace. The Raptors didn't move. If anything, they pressed in closer, the lead pilot's wingtip now barely 20 feet from her canopy. She could feel his jet wash slamming into her aircraft, the turbulence making her Hornet shudder, and the stick writhe in her hands like it wanted to break free. Listen up, Navy jock, the lead pilot said, his tone turning hard. This is our training area. We've got priority, and we've got 4 Raptors saying you're going to comply. Now break off before this gets ugly. The threat was as clear as the static between their words. Sarah's temper flared. She'd run into this breed before, the hotshot Air Force types who thought their stealth jets made them untouchable, who'd never seen a missile's lock-on warning scream in their ears. To them, it was a game. For her, it had been life or death. Raptor led, I'm declaring an emergency. Low fuel state, approaching bingo. Clear the pattern immediately. Her voice carried steel, the kind that came from combat experience. The Raptors still didn't move. Instead, the lead had the gall to laugh. Emergency, right. Every Navy pilot pulls that when they want priority. Here's a newsflash, sweetheart. Your little bug smasher doesn't scare us. We own this airspace. Sarah's hand hovered near the radio switch. They had no idea who they were provoking, no clue about the line they'd just crossed. In her peripheral vision, the other 3 Raptors held their perfect positions, silent spectators to their leader's show of dominance. The storm churned around them like the walls of a vast gray cathedral. Lightning flashed, illuminating their cockpits for split seconds at a time. Far below, the Nimitz sailed on, unaware that high above, some of the Air Force's deadliest aircraft were playing chicken with a pilot whose call sign alone carried weight enough to stop wars. The lead Raptor edged even closer, 15 feet now, his jet wash battering her Hornet harder, making the airframe bucks like a restless bronco. Her fuel warning light began to flash. Less than 8 minutes left. You know what, Navy girl, the pilot said, every word dripping condescension. Maybe we should escort you back to your little boat. Make sure you don't get lost on the way home. Wouldn't want mommy and daddy worrying about their little princess. His wingman joined in, laughing over the comms. Yeah, boss, these carrier pilots need all the help they can get. Probably can't even find the deck without GPS. A third pilot chimed in, voice smug. Heard they need 3 tries just to land on that floating runway. Maybe we should give her some tips. Sarah's knuckles blanched against the stick. The Raptors began pressing her into a descending spiral, their formation boxing her in, forcing her path. It was classic intimidation, by the book, and it was working. Her fuel state was dropping toward the point of no return. Every second they blocked her approach, pushed her closer to a nightmare scenario, having to eject over open ocean. Raptor led, final warning. Sarah's voice was calm, but there was steel in it, a tone that should have made any seasoned pilot pause. Clear the pattern or what? The lead pilot cut her off with a derisive snort. You'll file a complaint, report us to your CO. Face it, sweetheart, you're outgunned and outclassed. 4 Raptors against 1 antique Hornet. Do the math. The 4th F-22, silent until now, eased into position directly above her. Through the glint of his canopy, Sarah could see the pilot peering down, probably snapping photos to brag about later in the ready room. Humiliation burned in her chest. Elite Air Force pilots treating her like she was nothing more than a slow-moving target drone, a training prop. But they'd made a mistake, a fatal one. They thought she was just another pilot. Her hand moved toward the radio transmit button, unhurried, deliberate. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had stared death straight in the face and walked away. 2 words. That was all it took. This is Ghost. The reaction was instant, electric. The lead F-22 yanked his stick so hard his jet snapped away from her Hornet in a sharp, almost panicked break. Sarah caught a glimpse of his helmet slamming back against the headrest. The radio, moments ago filled with cocky banter, went dead. No chatter, not even static. It was as if the airwaves themselves were holding their breath. "Ghost!" The lead pilot's voice came back, stripped of swagger, replaced by something that sounded dangerously close to fear. Did, did you say ghost? The other three F-22s broke formation instantly, pulling back to give her space, their movements so fast they bordered on frantic. Through the canopies, she saw helmets turning toward one another, body language radiating disbelief. "Confirm call sign," another pilot's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "Did she say ghost?" Then the air traffic controller's voice cut in, sharp, decisive, slicing through the tension like a blade. All aircraft, be advised, Ghost is airborne. Repeat, Ghost is in the pattern." The call spread like wildfire across military frequencies. On the USS Nimitz, conversation stopped mid-sentence in ready rooms. In the tower, veteran controllers who thought they'd seen it all suddenly sat up straighter. In the captain's quarters, where he had been quietly reviewing reports, the ship's commanding officer looked up sharply, eyes narrowing at the weight behind those words. "Ma'am," the lead F-22 pilot's voice now trembled between awe and apology. We didn't know. We had no idea it was you." Sarah kept her course steady. Her voice stayed professional even. "Raptor led, you are cleared to resume your training exercise. I have the deck." "Roger that, Ghost." Raptor's clearing the pattern immediately. A beat. Then softer, almost reverent. It's an honor to share the airspace, ma'am." The four Raptors peeled away, smooth and precise, but they didn't leave. Instead, they formed up at a respectful distance, no longer posturing as rivals, but flying as if in escort to royalty. On their squadron channel, the chatter exploded. Low, stunned voices filled with equal parts disbelief and excitement. "Holy, that's actually her? The Ghost? 6 kills in one fight, 6 aces in 12 minutes. I heard she took them down one by one, vanished them like they never existed." On the Nimitz's flight deck, crew members were abandoning tasks, moving toward the edge of the landing area for a better view. Pilots spilled from ready rooms onto observation decks. Even hardened chief petty officers, men and women who had decades of salt and oil in their veins, craned their necks skyward, hungry for a glimpse of the legendary Hornet. Sarah aligned for final approach, the Nimitz swelling larger in her windscreen. The Raptors hung back, still in formation, still watching, maybe still trying to believe they had just crossed paths with a living legend. The name Ghost was one of those rare call signs that carried weight far beyond a single squadron or service branch. It was spoken in ready rooms from Nellis to Norfolk, with the reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients or heroes who'd never come home. And now they knew why. 2 years, 3 months, and 16 days ago, Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been just another naval aviator. Spotless record, no reputation, a call sign no one outside her unit even recognized. They'd called her Rookie then. That name died over the Taiwan Strait, along with 6 enemy aces who had made the fatal mistake of underestimating her. The mission briefing had been simple. Escort a reconnaissance flight along the edge of contested airspace, show the flag, then return to the USS Ronald Reagan. Intelligence suggested minimal enemy presence. It should have been routine. Sarah had flown in position 4 in a 4-ship formation of FA-18 Super Hornets. She was the most junior pilot, flying alongside seasoned veterans. Lieutenant Commander Hammer Rodriguez led the group, with Viper Thompson and Buludormea Martinez filling out the formation. They were good. The best the Navy had. It wouldn't be enough. The ambush came without warning. "Bandits! Bandits! Multiple contacts, bearing 270, coming in fast." Viper's voice cracked across the radio just as 12 enemy fighters burst from behind the radar shadow of a mountain range, climbing hard toward them. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a choreographed kill. The enemy had planned it perfectly. Superior numbers, perfect positioning, total surprise. And these weren't just any enemy pilots. They were aces, flying the most advanced aircraft their nation could build. Hammer died first. A long-range missile found him before he could react, his Hornet vanishing in a violent bloom of fire and shrapnel. Sarah watched the piece, metal and flesh, spiral toward the ocean 20,000 feet below. "Hammer's down! Hammer's down!" Bulldog's voice was raw with rage. "All aircraft, defensive split! Engage, engage, engage!" The fight that followed was chaos incarnate. 12 against 3. The enemy had every advantage except one. They didn't know who they were fighting. Smoke trailed across the sky. Bulldog fought like a man possessed, taking down one enemy fighter before 3 more swarmed him. His last transmission was a defiant scream, abruptly cut off by a burst of static. Then, on Sarah's radar, his blip vanished. And then there was only one dot left. Her. Sarah found herself utterly alone in a sky swarming with hostile contacts. The radar scope before her glowed like a Christmas tree. 11 enemy fighters circling, closing in. They moved like sharks, their pilots probably already tasting victory. The rookie was trapped, hopelessly outnumbered, and by all logic, already dead. That's when something inside her shifted. The fear that had gripped her since the first missile launch, tightening her chest, clouding her thoughts, simply evaporated. In its place came a cold, calculating calm, sharp as glass. Time seemed to stretch. Every movement became deliberate. Every hostile blip on the radar wasn't just a threat anymore. They were predictable pieces on a board. She could see their angles, their mistakes before they made them, the holes in their formation. The chaos of the dogfight resolved into patterns, and Sarah began to hunt. She used the clouds like a predator, diving deep into the gray, disappearing completely, then bursting out where her enemies least expected. Her first kill came when she emerged from the edge of a towering cumulus, locking on and sending a Sidewinder missile straight into an enemy's engine before vanishing back into the mist. The pilot never had a chance to react. "Where is she?" Enemy radio chatter, picked up by American listening posts, began to show the first hints of panic. "She was right there. Ghost contact. I had her on radar, and then nothing." Sarah struck again and again, each time from a different direction, a different altitude, a different slice of cloud. She'd appeared just long enough to fire, then dissolve back into vapor like smoke. The enemy formation began to fray, pilots peeling off in desperate attempts to find the phantom stalking them. Her fourth kill didn't even require pulling the trigger. 2 enemy fighters locked on her radar signature chased her into a narrow canyon of clouds. They were so fixated on pursuit, they never saw each other until they collided head-on, merging into one massive fireball. From above, Sarah watched their flaming wreckage tumble away into nothing. "She's not human," one enemy pilot's voice, later translated by intelligence, came through heavy with fear. "She's a ghost, a demon. She's picking us off one by one, and we can't even see her." It wasn't just the missiles anymore. The psychological war was breaking them. They began firing at shadows, scattering in every direction, chasing phantom contacts that didn't exist. Sarah exploited each mistake without hesitation. Her 5th kill came when a rattled enemy pilot, convinced he was about to be hit from another angle, flew straight into her line of fire. She squeezed the trigger, and her missile tore his aircraft apart piece by piece in the sky. By now, what had started as a well-coordinated ambush had collapsed into a panicked rout. The surviving pilots were shouting for reinforcements, for orders, for anything that might stop the nightmare in the clouds. Her 6th and final kill came when the enemy flight leader, desperate to regain control, made the fatal mistake of trying to rally his forces over an open radio channel. Sarah triangulated his position from his voice, climbed high above the cloud deck, and dove like a hunting falcon. One Sidewinder later, his aircraft ceased to exist. The rest fled. Their voices over the radio were heavy with dread, muttering about a ghost in the clouds who had dismantled their entire formation. Intelligence intercepts later confirmed that enemy pilots began refusing missions in that sector, claiming the area was haunted by the spirit of a dead American pilot. When Sarah finally touched down on the USS Reagan, her Hornet was running on fumes. Fuel nearly gone, ammunition almost empty. She had been in the air for more than 3 hours, most of it in relentless, close-quarters combat. The deck crew who ran to meet her found a young woman who looked as though she had aged 10 years in one afternoon. The debrief lasted 6 hours. Intelligence officers, squadron commanders, even admirals wanted to know how a single pilot had turned certain slaughter into a resounding victory. Her gun camera footage was locked away at the highest classification level, but word of what she had done spread through the fleet like wildfire. Within a week, Rookie was gone and Ghost was born, a call sign whispered in ready rooms and feared by enemies who had never even laid eyes on her aircraft. Now, as Sarah lined up her approach to the USS Nimitz, that legend preceded her. It had turned cocky fighter jocks into respectful escorts and transformed a routine carrier landing into a moment that would be remembered in aviation history. The Nimitz's flight deck stretched out ahead of her like a steel ribbon floating on the endless sea. The carrier's island superstructure bristled with radars and antennas, while the deck crew moved with the crisp precision of muscle memory, even as the weather began to turn. Dark storm clouds were building on the horizon, the ship pitching gently with the growing swells. Her approach was flawless, a controlled descent that spoke of thousands of carrier landings. Her fuel gauge was in the red, but her hands were steady. Behind her, 4 F-22 Raptors held their formation, still processing that they'd just flown alongside a living legend. "Ghost, you're looking good. Call the ball." The landing signal officer's voice crackled in her headset. "Hornet Ball 2.1, Sarah replied, giving her aircraft type and fuel state in the traditional call. "Roger Ball Ghost. Bring her home." Word had already swept across the flight deck. Sailors who should have been focused on their duties were stealing glances toward the horizon. In the tower, controllers leaned forward. Even the captain had stepped out onto the bridge wing, drawn by the knowledge that he was about to witness something rare. Her Hornet's wheels kissed the deck, the tail hook snagging the number 3 wire with a satisfying thunk that rippled through the carrier. She rolled to a stop as the deck crew swarmed her jet, not just with efficiency, but with reverence usually reserved for heads of state or war heroes returning from legend. And as Sarah shut down her engines, the storm clouds finally closed in. Sarah shut down her engines and began her post-flight checklist with practiced precision. Overhead, the 4 F-22 Raptors made a low, thunderous pass over the carrier, their formation so flawless it seemed choreographed. It was a gesture of respect, and every sailor on deck had their eyes tilted toward the sky, following the silhouettes until they disappeared. The Raptors banked away toward their home base, their pilots no doubt already shaping the story they'd tell for the rest of their lives. Sarah climbed down from her cockpit, the cool ocean air doing little to cut through the heat that had soaked her flight suit. Sweat clung to her like a second skin. The deck crew chief approached, a grizzled master chief with 30 years of naval aviation carved into the deep lines of his face. There was something close to awe in his expression. "Ma'am," he said simply, extending a weathered hand, "it's an honor." Word of Ghost's arrival had already rippled through every corner of the ship, traveling by that mysterious, wordless network of communication that exists on all naval vessels. In the ready room, pilots abandoned mission briefs for the chance to catch a glimpse. Junior officers who had only heard the hushed, almost mythic tales of the Taiwan Strait now found themselves with a rare opportunity to meet the legend in the flesh. As Sarah made her way through the tight steel corridors of the ship, sailors nodded respectfully, some stealing quick glances when they thought she wasn't looking. She had never sought this kind of attention, had never wanted to be anything more than a good pilot doing her job. But legends, once born, develop a life of their own, whether you invite them or not. The ready room fell silent the moment she stepped inside. 24 pilots, ranging from fresh-faced ensigns barely out of flight school to weathered lieutenant commanders, turned toward her. Their expressions were a mix of respect, curiosity, and something near reverence. They were the best the Navy had to offer, and still they knew instinctively they were in the presence of something beyond skill, something rare. "As you were," Sarah said quietly. No one moved. It was then the Air Force squadron leader appeared in the doorway. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Blade Harrison, a 15-year veteran with more than 3,000 hours in an F-22, stepped forward. He was a pilot's pilot, a man who had earned his reputation through sheer skill and relentless dedication. But now his face was pale, his voice stripped of the arrogance that had filled the radio frequencies an hour earlier. Ma'am, he began, genuine remorse in every syllable. I owe you an apology. My flight, we had no idea who you were. If we had known, Sarah studied him for a moment, seeing past the uniform and rank to the younger version of herself. A pilot once certain that her machine and training made her untouchable. The Taiwan Strait had taught her otherwise. Colonel, she said at last, her voice steady, respect in aviation isn't about who you are. It's about what you've proven when everything goes wrong. Harrison nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. Yes, ma'am. It would be an honor to fly with you sometime, to learn from you. Maybe someday, she replied. But her tone carried the quiet certainty that it would never happen. She had learned to be careful about who she flew with, who she trusted with her life. Too many good pilots had died believing reputation could replace vigilance. From the back of the room, a young ensign, barely out of flight school, raised his hand. His voice was tentative. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, the Taiwan Strait, what was it really like? Silence fell again. Every pilot in the room leaned forward slightly, as though they might miss her answer if they so much as breathed too loudly. Sarah's gaze drifted, her eyes focusing on something far beyond the steel walls. 6 pilots died that day, she said at last. Her voice carried a weight that made several officers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Good pilots, better than most of you will ever be. They died because they underestimated their enemy, because they believed superior numbers guaranteed victory, because they forgot that in aerial combat, there's no second place. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. The enemy made the same mistake. They saw 1 aircraft against 11 and thought the fight was already over. They were wrong. The ensign swallowed hard. How did you... what made the difference? Her eyes turned cold, hard and sharp like winter steel. When she spoke, there was no bravado, only the measured certainty of someone who had faced death and refused to yield. I stopped thinking like a pilot and started thinking like a predator. I used their overconfidence against them, turned their numbers into a liability. And when it was over, 6 enemy aces were dead, and I was still in the air. She rose to her feet, signaling the conversation was finished. Remember this, your aircraft doesn't make you invincible. Your training doesn't guarantee survival. When the missiles start flying, the only thing that matters is whether you can adapt, overcome, and kill the other guy before he kills you. Sarah walked toward the door. No one spoke. No one moved. They all knew they'd just been given a lesson no classroom could teach. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. And gentlemen, she added, her voice carrying the steel that had made her legend, the next time you think about playing games with an unknown aircraft, remember, you never know who might be behind the stick. Some call signs are earned in blood. Then Ghost disappeared into the ship's quarters, leaving behind a room full of pilots who knew they would never forget the day they met her. Outside, the storm clouds kept gathering, but on the deck of the USS Nimitz, the most dangerous predator in the sky had come home. The legend of Ghost lived on, whispered in ready rooms, feared by enemies who understood that somewhere in the endless blue above, death still flew on silent wings, waiting for the next pilot foolish enough to underestimate the woman who had turned the Taiwan Strait into a graveyard.